Let's go.
Okay, does it look like we have everyone?
I believe so.
All righty. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening for a Veritas Wine Room virtual tasting with the Dallas Women Lawyers Association. We look forward to enjoying some champagne, cheese, and chocolate with everyone. But before we get started, I'd like to give a big thank you to Stephanie Culpepper for helping organize this event, and also would like to wish her a happy birthday. I don't know if
Yay!
Thanks so much.
Happy birthday!
All right, Stephanie, would you like to say a few words?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Bradley. So, hi, everybody. I'm Stephanie Goss Culpepper. I am the current DWLA president, a post that I'll hold for just 2 more weeks. And this event tonight is my final act as president. So, you know, in spite of some challenging circumstances, I think it's been a great year for DWLA. And so I think it's fitting to be closing out our year toasting with some champagne with so many of our members and friends. I want to thank you, Bradley, and Veritas for helping us organize this fantastic event. If everybody has to be stuck at home during the holidays due to the pandemic, at least we can be drinking champagne and eating delicious chocolate and cheese. So thank you to Veritas for everything you've done to make this such a wonderful experience tonight. Quickly, as you all know, this event is benefiting the DWLA Foundation. So I just wanted to highlight a few of the things that the DWLA Foundation has accomplished this year. The foundation is dedicated to supporting charitable giving to empower and support women in the legal profession in the Dallas community. And in 2020, it's been a real great breakout year for the foundation. We've awarded $4,500 in bar study scholarships to women law students from each of the local law schools, provided funding to organizations supporting Dallas women, including Attitudes in Attire, Hope's Door, Genesis Women's Shelter, and Unlocking Doors. And I'm very proud that we also established the Karen D. McLeod Memorial Grant, which supports small firm women lawyers in the development of their legal practice. Next year, the foundation is rolling out a new grant cycle, and so I can't wait to see what they do in helping even more organizations that support women in Dallas. Want to quickly thank, who I think is here, our president of the foundation, Susan Wetzel, for her hard work, and the entire foundation board for everything that they've done this year. And then finally, want to thank all of our amazing sponsors for this event tonight, including event sponsors Haynes & Boone, Weil Gotshal, Castle Law, and Jackson Walker. And want to thank in particular our premier sponsors, Estes Thorne & Carr and Amy Stewart Law, for their generous donation and support of the foundation this evening. So before we get started with the foundation, or the tasting, excuse me, I want to turn it over quickly to Dawn and Amy, who are here with us as our premier sponsors, to say a few words about their firm and welcome everyone. So Dawn, let's start with you.
Thanks, Stephanie. By the way, happy birthday, y'all. This is a big one for Stephanie, too. I mean, you know, she's all of, 30.
Right, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, we're so happy to be here, and I'm especially happy to be doing this with my friend Amy. Amy and I first met when I was her responsible associate at Gardner Wynn. And so we've known each other a few years, and I'm happy to say that when she started her firm, I could not have been happier, and she's been so successful, and I'm so proud of her in everything that she's accomplished. And we have a great time collaborating together on cases. And for any of you guys, if you ever need expertise in insurance law, this is the one that you need to go to. She's amazing. You guys, we decided we were going to talk about each other, and I'm going to talk about her. Tier 1 ranking in insurance law. Go to her. She's literally written the book. So, and she's tons of fun. And so when Stephanie and I were kind of brainstorming this idea, over lunch at Neiman's. Gosh, I missed that. She said, well, what about, we were talking about doing a champagne tasting, and I said, well, if it's bubbles, we've got to include Amy because she will be all in, I'm sure. I want to do one more shout out before I pass it over to Amy because I know we've all got bubbles waiting. I want to shout out to Dina Stroh, who I think is here online, who is the person when she was president of DWLA that started the DWLA Foundation. So Dina, this is your brainchild. I know it's near and dear to your heart, and look at us. Look at what everybody's doing. Yay, Dina. Amy, take it away. You're awesome.
All right. Thank you so much, Dawn. Thank you, Stephanie. And guys, I'm super excited about tonight. Champagne is one of my favorite things. So that this was an easy yes for me, and I appreciate being included. So Dawn and I decided we were going to talk about each other. We did not compare notes beforehand. And the funny thing is, here's how my notes start. Dawn has been a mentor and role model to me since I walked into my first summer associate interview at Gardier 3 or so decades ago.
Yeah.
So it has been a very long time. Dawn has been blazing trails her entire career and started her firm 2 years before I started mine. It was the first, or at least, I think the first, or at least one of the first women-owned firms in Dallas. And I don't know if you guys remember this, but those we do it all, and we do it all in heels ads that were like the most kick-ass ads I think I've ever seen. But since that momentous time in 2008, Dawn has been continuing and her firm, Estes Thorne & Carr, have been continuing their accomplishments at the top of their game, listed as in the U.S. News and World Report's best law firms in a number of categories, including commercial litigation, family law, and employment law. And then Dawn, most recently, was recognized in DCEO as one of their top 500 people in business, which is super exciting. So congratulations to you, Dawn.
Thank you, Amy.
And thank you for your friendship and your mentorship over the last, couple of years. And thank you for inviting me, asking me to join you in doing this super fun event. So with that, it's time for us to talk some bubbles, and we'll turn it over to Bradley Anderson with Veritas.
Yay, Bradley.
All right. Well, thank you. Before we get to the bubbles, I just wanted to briefly go over the chocolates and cheeses that y'all might have in front of you. For the chocolate truffles, everyone that ordered the truffles should have 4 different truffles. These are from Wiseman House Chocolates. Wiseman House Chocolates has been in business for about 20 years. They are producing, in our opinion, incredibly very sophisticated chocolates out of the small, quaint, and charming town of Hico, Texas. Hico, Texas is located about an hour and a half southwest of us. So there's the 4 truffles. One is the Texas Pecan truffle. That is the only truffle that has nuts on it. That is made with Texas pecans and Belgian milk chocolate. Then there is the Snooky truffle, which is a blend of coffee, Kahlua, and dark chocolate. It's rolled in cinnamon and sugar. So the one that looks a little crunchier, that's the Snooky. Then we have the Southern Hospitality, which is milk chocolate and Jack Daniels. And then the last one is called the Wild Woman, which is 2 different types of dark Belgian chocolate that are melted to perfection. And then on the cheeses, there's 2 different cheeses. They are both triple cream cheeses. The first one is one of our favorite cheeses. It's the Délices de Bourgogne, which is a triple cream cheese from France. It pairs, in our opinion, exceptionally well with champagne. The other is also a triple cream cow's milk cheese. This one is from California. It's called the Marin triple cream. And then everyone should have the Coppa Italiano, which is a cured salami that's washed in wine and spices, and it's delicious. And then everyone has the Summer Sausage, which is another local product that comes from the Lone Star Wenzel Meat Company, which is out of Hamilton, Texas. Hamilton is located about 30 minutes south of Hico, Texas, and the owner of Wenzel Lone Star Meat Company is the brother of the owner of the chocolate company. So They're both great businesses. My brother Brooks and I, we've been selling their stuff for about 12 years now. We're big fans of it. Now on to the champagne. So I'd like to introduce Jeff Gregory. Mr. Gregory is a big part of the Dallas food and wine scene. He has a master's degree in business and more than 15 years of wine sales, restaurant operations, and beverage management experience. He is currently employed as the regional sales specialist at Southern Glazers Wine and Spirits. As a longtime member of the Dallas wine community, Mr. Gregory has worked alongside some of Dallas's most notable chefs, including Chef Matt McAllister at FT33 and Filament. He garnered local and national acclaim for his beverage program at FT33. His wine program was included for 5 years among the Wine Enthusiast 100 Best Wine Restaurants in America. So without further ado, thank you for being here, Mr. Gregory.
Thank you. Thanks for the invite. It's a pleasure to see everybody tonight. I'm sure there are probably some familiar faces, but there's so many tiny screens to look at that if we've been acquainted in the past and I've poured you something delicious, let me apologize in advance if I don't see you or address you directly or say hello, but hello to everyone. When the Anderson brothers asked me to host this tasting, I was very excited. This is actually one of a couple of tastings that we've done together. And I think, at a time like this, after the year that we've had, we could all use a little bit of cheer for the holidays, and certainly sparkling wine brings that right to the forefront for most people I know. So what we are going to do tonight, as you're munching on charcuterie, cheese, truffles, hopefully sipping on some bubbles as well, is just run through the 4 wines that we're going to taste together. I'll sort of give you the order that we're going to discuss in, and we'll talk about a little bit of background information, just a little bit of education to make sure everybody comes away with a more comfortable understanding of the category of sparkling wine and champagnes, and equip you with a little bit of knowledge so that you feel more comfortable when we do get back out in the world and start dining in restaurants and looking for sparkling wine to celebrate the occasion with at our favorite restaurants once we hit the streets. So the order tonight will be beginning with our California sparkling wine from Roederer Estate. This is and the domestic offshoot of Roederer out of Champaign. So bona fide Champagne expertise, but produced in the Anderson Valley in Mendocino County, California. Then we will move into their flagship champagne, the Brut Premier, their non-vintage from the house in France. Then we'll move to Paul Roger, one of my favorite labels, very classic champagne, famously the daily drink of Winston Churchill. So definitely something special in our portfolio. And then we'll move into something a little bit more unusual, a little bit more family produced, a small grower named Jean Vasel out of a tiny town whose name everybody loves to say. It's a town called Bouzy in Champagne, and they do produce some beautiful wine. So we'll finish with that one. As you'll note, it's got much more intense color as a rosé than what we might have become accustomed to prior to now, but we'll discuss that when we get to that wine. So a little bit of background information. I'm going to quickly share my screen just so we can run through a couple of things and give you a little bit of knowledge. So just approaching the world of sparkling wine, right? And we think of champagne, but there is more than that. We're drinking primarily champagne this evening. But the world of sparkling wine does encompass any wine which has an effervescence to it, right? So as we are discussing champagne, it's good to remember to differentiate it from our Proseccos, Cavas, California sparkling wines, British sparkling wines, and other categories in the world of sparkling wines. And of course, champagne is the crown jewel of this category. They are the originators and remain the category leaders. And I think everybody's favorite sparkling wine, certainly mine. And so, good to know that all champagnes are generally sparkling wines. However, not all sparkling wines are what we would call Champagne. Champagne is a place, a region in France, who's of course become very famous for their wines. But the broader category we refer to nowadays as sparkling wine. As we examine the wines from Champagne, we do break the producers down into a couple of different categories. The ones that are most familiar to us, our Veuve Clicquots, our Roederers, our Moet Chandon, those larger names are what we refer to as house champagnes or négociant champagnes. So these are producers that are so large that they have to purchase a significant portion of the fruit from which they make champagne in order to achieve the production volume needed. And so they're purchasing lots of fruit on contracts from a large core of farmers that exist in the region that we refer to as growers. And slowly over the last, we'll say 5 decades, it's become more and more common for growers to break off from the traditional grower-negociant relationship of selling their fruit and begin producing and bottling their own champagne. So we refer to these as grower champagnes or récoltants. And then, of course, we've got the smaller category of cooperatives, which we don't often see. But if you're, someone who likes to poke around at champagne labels, you will eventually come across one that is neither coded as NM or RM, and you'll be looking at a cooperative champagne, which is a group of growers, usually in the same village, that produce and bottle together. So you can find the code usually below the address on the back label, sometimes on the front label. You'll see for the Roederer and Paul Roger NM, and then for the Jean Vasel, you will see RM on the label, signifying that they are an independent small family grower as opposed to a large house. So as we are examining the wines themselves, it's good to understand what goes into a bottle of champagne. I think most of us are surprised to learn when we first do that most champagne is actually made with more red-skinned grapes than it is with white-skinned grapes. Most grapes, despite the color of the skin, do have clear juice, and so almost all of the champagne that we drink on a regular basis is produced from both grapes of red color, and also white-skinned grapes or green grapes. In the case of champagne, that's usually going to be Chardonnay. And then the companions are Pinot Noir and Pinot Meunier, cousins by name and also genetically, that comprise sort of the richer side of a champagne profile. So we think of your traditional blended champagne as an assemblage, a blend of different grapes, or cuvée d'assemblage. And then on either side, we do have sub-styles that are a little bit more specialized. So wines that are made entirely from Chardonnay or white grapes only are referred to as Blanc de Blanc. Wines that are made from entirely Pinot Noir or entirely Pinot Meunier, or a combination of both, would be referred to as Blanc de Noir, indicating that they are made entirely from red grapes with no white grapes, no Chardonnay in the mix. And so our fourth wine does fall into this category. It's not a Blanc de Noir, but it is 100% Pinot Noir, made in a rosé style, whereas the other 3 wines that we're drinking tonight are going to be your traditional blended style of champagne with a combination of Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Pinot Meunier. So let me end this share. So as we move into the first wine, and feel free to taste along as I speak about the wines, or if you want to jump ahead back and forth. If you have 4 glasses in front of you, feel free to move between the wines. Feel free to stay on the wine you find most delicious, or taste along. It's up to you. But we will begin with Roederer Estate Brut. So this is actually one of the first sparkling wine producers I ever visited in person on a trip to the Anderson Valley. The farm that I was working for was selling grapes to Roederer, and so I was able to tag along for a delivery of fruit. And it is quite a sight to behold. Champagne production is a very involved process, and Roeder Estate is, in my opinion, at the top of the ladder when it comes to domestic sparkling wine production. So we do have quite a bit of champagne style wine made here in the United States. I tend to prefer those that have their roots in Champagne. Domaine Carneros is another favorite of mine that I sold in a former position. But Roederer, I think, does earn its reputation quite well. So California wines, coming from a climate that's going to be a bit warmer than what we find in Champagne, which is a very cold region, will tend to have a little bit more weight to them and a little bit more richness. The wines will be a little bit more generous in terms of texture, but they are sparkling wines. They are intended to be a crisp, lean drink and really sort of tickle the palate with that effervescence. And the Roeder Estate, I think, achieves a really beautiful balance of both the richness and sort of honesty of where the wine comes from a California climate, but also achieving that delicacy of the sparkling category. So one of my personal favorites, if you ever have a chance to visit Mendocino, it's about a 3.5 hour drive from San Francisco. If you feel like making a trip, it's a really fun place to visit. They have a great hotel there called the Boonville Hotel. And it's a great place to stay and visit the area, see some great Pinot Noir being grown, and also, in the case of Roeder Estate, some fantastic sparkling wine. Sparkling wines are always going to be interesting on the nose in ways that still wines are generally not going to achieve. You will get a little bit more complexity, and you will pick up on some of what we call non-fruit aromas. So most wines are going to give us some delicious fruit components, whether they be red wines with some raspberry, cherry, strawberry components, plum, or white wines with our tree fruit, apple, pear, citrus. Sparkling wines do bring quite a bit more to the table in terms of some of the toastier aromatics that we get from the production, as well as things that express themselves by virtue of the amount of contact the wine has with yeast. So one thing that almost all sparkling wines are going to have in common will be a second fermentation. They go through the first fermentation as normal wines, producing the alcohol, converting from juice into a base wine. And then the secondary fermentation is where we are less concerned with the production of alcohol, but considering more the capturing of the CO2 that gives the wine its natural effervescence. And in almost all cases, whether it is Prosecco or wines that are secondarily fermented in bulk, or wines that are done in the champagne method where each individual bottle is fermented a second time on its own, anything outside of perhaps, say, canned sparkling wine, which is carbonated more like a soda would be, you're going to be looking at a secondary fermentation, which can bring these additional notes, a little bit more complexity, a little bit more savory character, and then, of course, that wonderful sort of texture that we get from really beautiful sparkling wines. Another thing I'll mention as we move to the second wine, the Roederer Brut Premier, is that you'll note that Bradley, Brooks, myself, quite possibly many of you as well, are drinking our champagne out of a traditional wine glass, white wine glass. The reason for this is that when we are enjoying really beautiful, high-quality sparkling wines, beautiful champagnes, in order to capture the full experience of the aroma, right? We definitely do a service to the wine to give it a little bit more room to stretch its legs aromatically. A champagne flute, tall and slender glass, is really primarily intended to preserve effervescence. the effervescence leaves via the surface area that's exposed to air. And so you will keep the wine fizzier, longer in a champagne glass. However, the shape of the glass is also going to restrict the aromas. And as we all know, the aroma is really what wine is about. So in the case of champagne, definitely also acidity and texture. But the aroma is a big part of the experience. And we definitely serve the wines in a white wine glass in restaurants where I work. And that allows them to express a little bit more fully in the glass. So either way is definitely fine. But I think if you give it a try, if you've never had champagne out of a white wine glass, you may try it out next time you have a bottle or if you have a glass handy. And I think you'll see that you get a little bit more aromatic expression out of wine.
So are you a fan of the sort of old-fashioned champagne glasses? I pulled them out thinking we were supposed to use them.
You know, I love those. And ultimately, champagne is a festive drink, right? So there's, I think, no wrong way to drink champagne. I think Brooks and Bradley will probably second me that if you could put champagne in it, I probably drank champagne out of it. Coffee cups, tumblers, water glass, depending on the circumstances. I don't go camping without champagne, for example. So, even sitting around a campfire, I'll have champagne maybe in a tin coffee cup. So there is no wrong way to drink champagne, in my opinion, except to not drink champagne. So traditional champagne coupes would be the name of that glass. I think are beautiful. They're really elegant. I think super classy. And I think a very fun way to sort of give an homage to a very traditional way of drinking champagne. So I definitely advocate the coupe as well.
So my coupe is like 90 years old.
I love it.
And someone else talked about drinking it from red Solo cup, which apparently is acceptable also.
I was not going to mention the Solo cup. However, most wine professionals have done it at one time or another in a pinch. It's not our preferred way to consume fine wine, but it is often done, unfortunately. But not today. I have my glassware today. So the Roederer Brut Premier, Louis Roederer, again, a leading house in Champagne. They really break ground in a lot of ways. They have been among the first to, and it's easy to think of all of these large, famous names in Champagne sort of on equal footing, and they all have contributions to make, to be certain. However, I think Roederer has really done a lot for advancing the emphasis on quality winemaking that we're seeing prevail in Champagne today. For many decades, Champagne was what we would consider a wine of process over place. And in many circumstances, process over quality. You can take fairly bad wine, make it effervescent, and you can make sparkling wine that is going to deliver part of the experience, but not necessarily be its full potential expression of a fine wine. Roederer, in the way that they blend, in the way that they've been farming and really placing emphasis on understanding the different parcels of land that they purchase grapes from, keeping them separate as you would see in any other traditional winery, and then blending together at the end, I think is a great contribution to the quality that we're seeing coming out of Champagne, which is, Champagne is definitely in a golden age at this point. And among other producers, we definitely have Roederer to thank for that as well. Brut Premier is their non-vintage brut, so sort of their everyday drinker, largest production wine that they make. And of course, they're famous for their Tête de Cuvée Cristal, which many people might be familiar with. It comes in a crystal bottle and the gold colored covering, which protects the wine from ultraviolet rays, not just decorative. But Brut Premier is delicious for special occasions and weeknights. as we make the transition from California sparkling wine to champagne, I think the finesse of the nose, the difference is clear. We get a little bit more delicacy. We get a little bit more freshness out of this wine, a little bit more refinement. Better texture, greater balance of acidity with the fruit, and really just a very complete and almost perfect glass of champagne. Better length on the palate. Champagnes do tend to be a little bit higher in acid. I think that's part of why they're so good with food. Talk to most sommeliers, and will tell you that champagne doesn't really clash with anything. You can almost drink champagne with any meal as well as by itself. Based on the acidity of the wine, I spent a significant portion of my career working with a chef who was in love with very high acid food. So I'm very accustomed to a great deal of acid, and drinking champagne on its own doesn't bother me. However, it is very acidic. And I think with food, it is an even better way to enjoy champagne, if possible. The truffles that you're enjoying, charcuterie, cheese, olives, all of these are great companions to champagne, and they just provide a nice foil in between bites to cleanse the palate, calm the acidity. Acid has the natural effect of making the mouth water. And so what do we want then once our mouth is watering is other than a nice bite of cheese or some bread or charcuterie, olive, something like that. We get a lot of questions as sommeliers as of what wines pair best with chocolate. Champagne would actually be my answer in most circumstances. Chocolate's obviously very sweet, can definitely have some very bitter components as well. And the dryness of most champagnes, I think, lends itself to enjoying with heavily sweet chocolates and other desserts and things like that. So chocolate and champagne, unless you're going out and buying some dessert wine or something like that, I think is the most suitable, readily available pairing that you could have. So I hope they are going well together. So with most non-vintage brut champagnes, Paul Roger being no exception, all three grapes play a significant role in the blend. And Paul Roger would be considered the most traditional blend, which would be to combine these grapes in equal proportions. So equal thirds Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Pinot Meunier. The Roeder is a little bit of a departure to that. I think it's actually 80% red grapes, 20% Chardonnay, whereas the Paul Roger will have a little bit more Chardonnay, beefing up the acidity a little bit. But Paul Roger is also a house that is known for wines that are a little bit more assertive in their profile. So that brings us to the question of house style, which was kind of the focus of the last champagne seminar that I did. The best way I can explain is that each of these producers has their own philosophy and their own taste. This is similar to, if I were to go to, if 5 of you invited me to your homes and we had barbecue, it would differ from person to person based on personal taste and what you envision as the ideal flavor profile. Each champagne house brings their own personal spin to the category. We refer to this as house style. Some tend to be a little bit sweeter, a little bit richer, some very acid driven, some very lean, some lower effervescence, others very fizzy, very persistent mousse. And so Paul Roger is known as a more assertive, rounder, fuller profiled champagne house. This happens to be the style that I think prevails in Great Britain as well. They tend to appreciate champagnes that are a little bit more oxidative, a little bit richer, a little bit toastier. Bollinger is another house that's extremely popular. We see it referenced often in James Bond movies, right? Bollinger is similar to Paul Roger in that regard, in that the wines tend to be a little bit more presence of oak in some other wines, and a little bit more heft to the wines. So as we smell this, we do get a bigger nose, right? It's going to remind, at least me, I think, for most wine drinkers, this is going to remind you a little bit more of, say, a Chardonnay or a white Burgundy. It's a little bit more intense on the nose, a little bit more impression of that toastiness that we associate with wines that have been in a barrel. And on the palate, this carries through. The wine's a little bit more intense. If you're really geeking out about it, you can even see this in the color of the wine. If you have a white background to look between the two, you can see that this wine's got a little bit more color to it as well. More length on the palate, a little bit more generosity, more that sort of ripe yellow apple, as opposed to the leaner profile that we get from the Roederer. Georgetown, Texas is a wonderful place, by the way. I'm a Longhorn, so all the suburbs of Austin are near and dear to my heart. And so this kind of gives us a nice insight into the fact that, you would think, we see this with spirits, right? Brand loyalty. People are either a Grey Goose drinker or a Kettle One drinker, or they might be a Jim Beam drinker versus a Maker's Mark drinker, or you can apply this to certain categories of wine. But with champagne, it is very easy to find producers that you like, and you can generally trust that there will be sort of a common thread stylistically among the different wines in their range. And for those that are shopping for champagne, one of the best ways to find new champagnes that you appreciate is to reference those that you already like with your with the staff at your local wine shop, whether it be Central Market, Pogo's, Veritas. If you tell them that you are a Bollinger drinker, they should be able to steer you in the direction of houses that produce wines in a style in the same vein. So just a little trick for finding champagnes that you're going to like while you're branching out. And this brings us to the wild card. So this is Jean Vasel Rosé de Saignée. This is a fun discussion, as rosé is an interesting conversation with regards to champagne. So when we think of still rosé, Provençal rosé, or Domaine Haute, or rosés from California or Oregon, Pinot Noir rosé, whatever the case might be, almost without exception, these are wines that are made into a rosé from red grapes. The pink color comes from the skin, so it is impossible to make red rosé without some interaction of red grapes. Most rosé that we drink, still rosé, is entirely made with red grapes. Most champagne rosé is not. The original and most common method, if we were to go back 200 years, would be to add still red wine to a bottle of champagne. We call that rosé by addition. There are two other ways to make rosé, and one is called direct press, which is where we take the red grapes, allow them to slowly be pressed, imparting color onto the juice as it runs out of the press, right? So as grapes are loaded into the large press and gently pressed, they're slowly and softly pressed for some hours as the juice slowly runs off. And so as the color begins to leach out into the juice, you'll start to tint that juice pink. Actually not so common. Rosé de Saignée is a method of taking a vat of red grapes that are being pressed and commingling with the juice, and to bleed juice off the bottom of that tank. The skins and seeds will be floating, and you'll bleed juice off the bottom of that tank, and that will be pink in color, of course. And so that is why we see this wine have such a greater deep pink color than most of the rosés that we're accustomed to. They are wines that are dialed into a very specific color. You know, the style today is for very pale rosés. That's kind of what's in fashion. But if we were to go back many years ago, rosés, especially from this particular village and surrounding villages in the Montagne and Champagne, would be of darker color because they had spent more time in contact with the skins. So Jean Vasel, very small producer, owned by a lovely young man and his wife. I had the pleasure to visit this particular house and tasted their entire range of wines with their importer, a lovely gentleman who's a good friend of Brooks and Bradley's by the name of Billy Weiss, who owns and operates an import company called North Berkeley Imports. Very boutique import company, and deals in a couple of different champagnes, but all of which are the smaller grower champagne category. So whereas we would place these house champagnes in the large multinational big corporate entity category of producers, not to say that has anything to do with the quality, but these are the grower champagne category is populated with what we think of as a winery. It is a facility with surrounding vineyards, and generally owned, operated, and run by a family and or a couple of siblings who maintain the day-to-day operations themselves and make the wines. So lots of fun. They're definitely wines with a face and a personality behind them. Does not make them better by any means. There are lots of terrible grower champagnes, just as there are house champagnes I don't like to drink. But they are interesting and a fun category to support because they are a little bit more small and local, as it were. This wine definitely has much more of the characteristic that you would pick up out of a Pinot Noir. So we're getting what I would think of as some red wine character out of this, definitely some red fruit. And this takes us back to the conversation about champagne and how it pairs with food. This is a champagne that I would enjoy with a steak, quite honestly. Steak, lamb, red meat, pork, barbecue, all things that would go with champagne, but definitely shine a little bit with a wine that had a little bit more heft and a little bit more intensity to the fruit profile. And this wine having the greater skin contact with the Pinot Noir. This is a 100% Pinot Noir in this wine. Brings a little bit more of that red fruit and a little bit more of that Pinot quality to the wine. So I see Catherine Paulson is going to be swinging by Veritas for a bottle of Jean Vasel tomorrow, I imagine. So those are the four wines. Feel free to taste back and forth between them. They're wonderful to compare. I think comparative tasting is really the key to educating your palate about wine. Wine tasted alone in a vacuum is lovely for enjoyment, but for education, some frame of reference and something to compare to really helps. And so being able to taste multiple wines side by side, especially in an instance like this where we have half bottles, and so we can enjoy even more wines together, is a wonderful and hopefully not too rare, but I certainly don't open 4 bottles of champagne on a daily basis for my own consumption. And so it's nice to be able to taste these side by side. So I encourage you to go back and forth. If you've already finished a bottle or two, no shame there at all. But they start to illuminate each other a little bit more as you move back and forth between the wines. So if Bradley feels that we have time, I would love to answer any questions, or if there's anything I can go back on and elaborate on, I would be happy to. I'll leave that up to Bradley though.
Actually, Stephanie, it's up to you. Are we good on time?
Yeah, whatever you guys want to do, we're good.
I would also love to. I'd love to hear favorites in the chat. If you have a preference between those that you tasted tonight, I'd love to hear which one you preferred. Four half bottles is probably doable for a Somm.
You shouldn't admit to that.
It is our drink of choice, for sure. So I will say my favorite between the four is the Brut Premier. I'm a Roederer fan. I don't get to drink Cristal every day, even though I would love to. Brut Premier is, I think, just the most classic expression of champagne. It's if I have the yearning for a glass of champagne, this is very much in the avenue of what I'm wanting, what I'm craving. So Roederer Brut Premier is my choice. I love the Paul Roger. I think, especially with a cheese board, Paul Roger would possibly be my choice. And as I stated, if I were having, something tomato-based or braised meat or grilling with friends, Jean Vasel, excellent choice.
The Brut Premier is my favorite too, but the Roederer Estate, the non-true champagne one, I think is very good. So
it's definitely it's a favorite. It's a favorite.
Can I ask a question that's can you give us the price points for all of these, like for a full bottle, so that we know kind of what we're comparing? So when we go in the store, we go, oh yeah, that one.
Of course. So one of the interesting things, just by the economies of scale with half bottles are kind of expensive for what you pay for what you get. They unfortunately are not just half the price of a $7.50 bottle. So I think you get certainly better bang for your buck buying full bottles of champagne for a number of reasons. Roederer Estate full price, you're probably, I'm going to say that's going to be in the $26 to $29 range. Roederer Brut Premier is probably retailing in most shops for about, I would say about $42 to $45. Same for Paul Roger. And the Jean Vasel is probably closer to a $50 retail bottle. Actually, I think probably closer to $60 for the Jean Vasel. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yes.
Sorry, I was late because I was doing a flower arrangement with another women's group.
No worries.
There's a fair amount of people who know me on here, and if you know me, you know champagne is my jam, all the time. What I wanted to ask, given this group, and so if you touched on this already, sorry, but how about a female grower, producer, or maker? Who would you recommend?
Absolutely. Let me think.
I love the Peju bubbles. I mean, which are obviously not champagne since they're out of California, but there's women who make those. The rosé bubbles are awesome there. So I'm always looking for, because champagne is obviously very personal to people, either a women grower, or I had a really hard time finding a person of color grower for bubbles.
Absolutely.
I actually found one, but yeah, I was just wondering if you had any suggestions there, or Bradley, maybe you do.
Rocco out of Oregon produces excellent sparkling wines, and not a female winemaker, but an African-American winemaker. And Rocco has a really great history with sparkling wine here in the U.S. Roland Souls is the owner of Rocco. He was the founder of Argyle Winery, and he is probably considered the pioneer for sparkling wine out of Oregon. His label, it's spelled ROCO. In my opinion, I don't know what Mr. Gregory's thoughts are on him, but he makes some of the best sparkling wines here in the U.S., in my opinion. Some other fun facts about Roland Souls is he's a Texan. He's an Aggie. He grew up here in DFW. He used to be Lyle Lovett's roommate in college. So he has lots of fun stories, and he's one of our favorite winery owners and winemakers.
So there's only one female grower of champagne that I'm able to think of off the top of my head, and you are correct in stating that there's not a lot of representation, right? But and it is unfortunately a producer that is, in my experience, very difficult to acquire. But if you travel to New York on a frequent basis and or France, I know that the wines do exist in Texas. However, there's only one restaurant that I know has them, and it's a producer named Marie-Noël Ledru. I'll type it in the chat. But the wines are exceptional. They are, sorry, let me type. Marie.
Attributes those wines.
You know, I don't know, but I can find out. And I will get with you offline, and perhaps you could pick some up. I'm sure they'd be available right now, just based on the restaurant situation. But these are wines that are highly sought after by families. It's a small grower in one of the most famous villages in Champagne, called a village called Ambonnet. One of Brooks and Bradley's other favorite producers resides in the same village. It's a producer named Eglurier. Ledru is in the same village, and the wines are exceptional. So almost neighbors to Vasel. It's 2-3 kilometers away from their village, Bouzy. But that would be possibly the only female-led grower producer that I can think of off the top of my head. I believe there are more, but that's the one that comes to mind.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Of course. Any other?
Hey, ladies, I just want to let you know that my paralegal texted me, who's on the chat with us, and she says we need to start our own woman-owned champagnery. So you all have to be investors now. So, all right, we got thumbs up. All right, good deal. I'm sure it's really easy. How hard can it be, right?
Exactly.
Jeffrey,
Okay.
you'll help, right?
Of course.
There you go.
I will definitely be involved.
So Dawn, I was the last money in March in an all-female owned wine bar in San Francisco and New York called The Riddler. Jen Pelko, a lot of people probably on this phone know. She's actually does make her own bubbles called Une Femme, but I was the last money in on March probably 6th, and shocking to no one on this, both of them closed during the pandemic, which was really sad. But it was full female investors, and my hope was to actually bring it to Dallas.
Okay, they just added
That's
on.
awesome.
Hey, Vicki
Monica.
Blanton, you're not on mute. Oh, there you go.
Yeah, there. Now she is. That's
yeah,
awesome, Monica.
I was hoping to bring it to Dallas, so hopefully we can still make that happen.
Oh, that's awesome. That's
Hi, this is
exciting.
Vicki.
Keep us posted.
Hi, Vicki.
Hi, I'm sorry. I think I put it in the chat. I tasted a champagne maker, and you mentioned in New York, and I don't recall her name, but I do remember the label was Stuyvesant. So like Bed-Stuy, she was kind of from that area, and so she was saying it was challenging for her now of trying to get back and forth to France to bottle, and she does small productions. But I tasted her rosé, and it was very nice, very festive.
Very good. Yeah, I see their website. Yeah, I've heard of them, but I've not had the wines before.
Yeah, but just in the mention of a woman of color, Black woman owned champagne label, and she just does champagne.
Wow, very nice. Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome. Always good to share champagne.
Absolutely.
Not too much. Never too much.
No kidding.
Good.
Anyone else have any questions or comments?
Just one comment from the chat. Someone asked a recommended affordable option. So of this lineup, the Roederer Estate would be the least expensive. However, there are lots of wonderful options for even more sort of casual everyday drinking, large parties and things like that. Since we're all throwing a lot of large parties right now, but Prosecco, Cava, either of those categories are going to offer wines that you can easily purchase by the case for an event or for a mimosa brunch or something like that. And they're wines that can be delicious on their own, but if you are making cocktails with them or going to be making them into mimosas, those are great options that you would often find in the sub $20 price point.
Jeff, do you also want to touch upon a category that most people are probably not familiar with? Everyone always hears Prosecco, Cava, but there's the whole world of Cremant.
Absolutely. Cremant, I did have on my slide. Cremant is the unsung hero of French sparkling wine, and there are they are definitely existing in the shadow of champagne, partially why none of us have heard of the wines. Cremant comes from a variety of regions in France, and encompasses most of the sparkling wine that's produced in the quote unquote champagne method, which is secondary bottle fermentation, produced in France, but not in Champagne. So, for example, champagne style wines are produced in Burgundy, in Alsace, in the Loire Valley, in Southwest France, in Provence. And so anywhere you can grow grapes, you can certainly make sparkling wine. And in France, those wines often carry the name of Cremant de Bourgogne, for example, referring to sparkling wines from the Burgundy region. The word Cremant refers to the texture. So sparkling wines tend to have good ones, have a sort of a creamy texture to them, which is where they take that name from. There is also a village in Champagne called Cramant, Cramant, not to be confused. That is actual champagne.
And Cremants, because they are not made within Champagne, are oftentimes much more affordable. So there's a lot of great examples where your retail price point is going to be in the low 20s, mid 20s, and that's what I often find myself drinking, just because of the price point of Champagne. So for me, it's a fun French champagne method drink that doesn't carry the price tag.
Yes, Cremants are fantastic value. Fantastic value. Often, honestly, can be had for less than most domestic sparkling wines at this point. So, very, very good values.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
I must have an allergy or something, because I notice after multiple glasses, the more I drink, I get like a really bad headache, and it gets worse.
Mm-hmm.
The more glasses I have. Is there something that can be done about that? No, I'm just kidding. So,
drink lots of water while you're drinking champagne.
Good idea.
Hydrating is the key. Hydrating is the key.
Or drink better champagne.
Even the good stuff will do it to you. Brooks and Bradley can attest to the fact that when you're visiting wine country, you got to drink like a liter of water for every stop. Every winery you visit, drink a liter of water, and you will sail through the day comfortably.
That way you can get up the next morning, feel good, and go back to work. So
exactly. Yeah, someone mentioned Lucien Albrecht, one of my favorite rosés, great value, and I poured that by the glass in a number of different wine programs. Really good stuff. So, well, Bradley, any other questions from your end?
No, I don't see anything.
Okay.
Well, everyone, thank you so much for joining us. We hope everyone enjoyed the past hour. We certainly had fun. So thank you for allowing us to be a part of y'all's tasting and your fundraiser. And we hope it was successful for everyone.
Yes. And happy holidays.
Absolutely.
Happy holidays.
Cheers to everyone.
It was super fun.
Thank
All
you.
right. Cheers.
Happy birthday, Stephanie.
Yes. Happy birthday, Stephanie.
Happy birthday, Stephanie.
Happy birthday to you.